We're back. We're back.
All right. Thank you. I had to get my groceries sorted.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much for your patience, Jason.
Yeah. I was just surfing Twitter. It's fine.
Oh no. Oh no.
I,
Did you
I got
throw any
that. I got that off
bombs?
my checklist. My to-do list for the day. It's like I need to I need to give due time to Twitter. Make sure I've absorbed
Yes.
all of the random thought streams. But now I'm back, and so I've gotten that taken care of. Thank you.
Got to get your random thought stream fix.
Right. Every 5 minutes because it's always there's always a new stream every 5 minutes. So
I mean, it's
never
true
ends.
that it is never ending.
Yeah.
Never ending.
Yeah. I mean, my 15-year-old self would be drooling, right? Because when I was 15, late 90s, information was still available, but it wasn't nearly as available as it is now. This was like
For sure.
pre-internet. Well, at least internet was just getting going, but
Very early internet.
exactly. And so I had to really work for like a new perspective. And now they're just kind of overwhelming. So that's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, that is very interesting. Hmm. I wonder how it is for our kids. They're such they're so native to these. I heard a good definition of technology. I forget who it was. They said technology is anything that was invented after you were born. Um, I thought that was a kind of interesting way of talking about it,
Right.
thinking about
Right.
it.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't, Gen Z is kind of like the real first guinea pig generation, the real digital native generation. Um, and, I interact with Gen Z in my classes, when I'm teaching. And, they seem pretty smart and, um, they don't seem as diluted as some people make them out to be, at least my small sample size. Um, but it's a very different world that they're growing up in for sure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What we grew up in. You're like 4 days older than me, so
Oh,
we can talk about
am I 4 days older than you? Is that
I
right?
think so. I think we established you're like July, what, 6th is your birthday?
No, I'm on the 15th. I think you're a
15th.
little older than me, right?
Oh, really? Yeah, I'm July 9th.
You're my elder.
Really? This whole time I thought you were like 4 days older, and I was like, oh man.
No, the other way around.
Okay. 1983, represent.
Yeah, the elder millennials, as
Elder
I've heard.
millennials, yeah,
Yeah,
just
yeah.
old enough that we can like look at our slightly younger millennial brethren and be like, you guys need to get adulting out of your vocabulary. Like that was a mistake. That was just a mistake.
Just go straight to humaning or what?
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, no, it's I know I remember your Twitter post slapping at the millennials a little bit there, where you were talking about your least favorite generation.
Right, right. I ranked generations. I put Gen X at the top. Even though they're kind of cynical bastards, I still like them. Um,
Do you feel like you identify more with the Gen X than the
Well, they were
millennials?
always
Why?
the cool kids, right? Like they were always like the older cool kids, and so the
Yeah,
culture of Gen X is what I was steeped in. I think,
yeah,
um,
yeah.
as well as Boomer like classic rock and all of the mythology of like the '60s and
Right,
'70s and all of that.
right.
But yeah, I mean, uh, the millennial. I mean, I grew up as a millennial, and all of kind of like the stuff that's true, selfie generation, adulting, which I
Adulting.
was I went through an adulting phase, so I can't really be too righteous about it. Yeah, but yeah, I listed millennials as my least favorite generation. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
I was thinking about putting boomers there, but I was like, people beat up on boomers so much, and even though they deserve it, like I couldn't do it. And they had the '60s, so you have to give them credit for that. So
Yeah, it's great to hear the wonderful, beautiful stories of the '60s.
yeah, right.
And
And
how
and
how much
going back
worse
to
certain things were.
yeah, and going back to like our discussion of like homesteading and permaculture, the back to the land movement in the late '60s and '70s. for the most part, it was kind of a failure. But I think that they really planted the seeds for what I'm hoping can arise now, and planted the seeds both in terms of like what didn't work, and also like scattered communities that actually like figured some stuff out and have some wisdom to share. So I think I see that as kind of like an initial version, and now we're trying for 2.0 type of thing. And so I'm grateful that they had those aspirations and they were naive, but they learned their hard knocks, and then they all went into finance and got rich, and now they own all the wealth in the world. But I'll forgive them from that for now.
Yeah, that's kind of you. I think it's nice that you're looking out for the boomers
Yeah, yeah,
as
yeah.
they
I mean, my
fade.
parents are boomers. I love my
Yeah,
parents. So
yeah, that's cool. I
yeah,
appreciate that. Um, homesteading. This is one thing I want to talk to you about. I've been curious about the homesteading movement more now,
yeah,
and this is, of course, if you go all the way back to like the Homesteading Act of 1862.
hmm,
It's really an invitation by the colonizing kind of new government coming in, like, just go grab land, like it's yours.
yeah,
And so
yeah.
there's this sort of, I think, conversation, of course, that's at a different cross current of the cultural, maybe it's like in the woke waters or something.
Right,
It's,
right.
and I think it's important too. It's not
Yeah,
like, that's not a dismissive comment on my part, actually.
yeah,
I think it's important to say, well, hey, like, what does it mean if you're taking like a deeper time perspective on all this stuff or trying to,
yeah.
and like, oh yeah, like it's not that long ago that like some of our ancestors rolled in and just like took over,
Right. I live in the
whatever you want to call
place.
it.
I live in we live in the region that's notable for the Trail of Tears, right?
Right, and the
Driving the
Cherokee
Cherokees
Indians.
out.
Yes,
After already harassing them and killing many of them, and really
of course,
trying to degrade their
the crazy infectious
the infectious.
disease stuff, which is sort of
Yeah. And then at some
weaponized
point,
at times.
Andrew Jackson and others decided that they're just going to drive them all out, and they're going to march them over to some foreign land, aka Oklahoma, and yeah, no, I think all of that criticism of homesteading and this idea of the yeoman farmer is legit, but I think we have to hold kind of two things at once in our hearts and our minds, and one is this terrible history, this original sin that we're all implicated in. Any non-native, and I would say non-African American, you know, person who lives here, our
Right.
ancestors, most of our ancestors are implicated in. But I also think, we have to, so we can acknowledge that, but we can also acknowledge, for example, that, uh, for example, in this area, we had this idea of like the yeoman farmer, and kind of, the white settlers, and they were kind of, you can say, quasi self sufficient, quasi sustainable.
Hmm.
They weren't nearly. It wasn't nearly as individualistic as sometimes made out to be. There was like village
Right.
economies.
And religious communities were really tight in neighborhoods, and
Yeah, yeah, and a lot of like the not some of the wisdom of the indigenous past was picked up by these folks in terms of like being very mindful of the seasons and of the ecology that they lived in. I mean, out of necessity, right? Like they had to understand, in order to survive, like they had to not degrade their land. They had to like, understand, seasons. They had to understand what things grew, how to forage, how to hunt. They had to have an ecological consciousness, even if they didn't, you know, conceptualize it that way. Like that was just part of the territory.
hmm
Um,
and part of
and
the
I think when
time,
we're talking about
especially.
a neo homesteading, so the reason why I kind of you know latch on to the homesteading and localist movement. In addition to what's called like bioregional regeneration, and stuff, is because I think that it's kind of like a metamodern homesteading, right? Where we acknowledge the original sin, and but we're also not rejecting all of the past, and we're not rejecting, you know, the culture of our ancestors wholesale, right? We're acknowledging that they got some things right, even if it was in a larger context of displacement and everything else. And I, we can have a whole conversation about this, but I tend to think that, if we want to really move towards sustainability, we're going to have to really think in terms of localization. Bioregionalism to me is just localism. The bioregional scale is one of the important scales of localism. The other one is kind of like the village community level. Um, and so drawing from these different kind of movements, and when you say bioregionalism, that tends to be more left wing. When you say homesteading or localism, that tends to be a little bit more trad, you know kind of, I would say, a little bit more right wing. But there's so much overlap that to just kind of reject one side or the other because of our left or right leaning tendencies, I think would do disservice, because what we're up against, what I would call like more of the globalist, neoliberal, placelessness, global capitalist extractive model, is a beast, right? And so we have to like find allies where we can, and acknowledge that, hey, these folks also want to live more localized lives. They want to take care of the land. They want to be sustainable. They're interested in permaculture and biodiversity, and so we should try and build bridges.
Yeah. And it seems like there's a movement trying to be more capable of providing more of what we need for lower input
Right.
cost,
Right. In the long term. Right.
closer to the point of need.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, we don't know what the future holds in terms of like energy, and I know we've had some back and forth about our energy future, and I think you're a little bit maybe more optimistic about our
Maybe a
energy
little bit,
future,
maybe a little more brighter green.
a little bit more brighter green.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I tend to think that, the days of fossil fuels are numbered, and of course we're switching to renewables. That's the trend that's happening, but it's not clear that renewables will be able to power the economy at the same scale that it does today, at least with the
And in the
current,
same way that it's
in the same
functioning.
way, right? So
Yeah, that's right.
with the current capitalist system, global capitalist system, with large dense cities that don't really that have to draw in all of their resources from outside, from all over the world, right? In these long, complex supply chains, um, I tend to think that we should use this precious time where we still have abundant energy, and we still have, frankly, materials that have embodied fossil fuels in them. Whenever we use a tractor, whenever we, buy any product, there's an embodied carbon footprint in there, right? And
Correct.
and if we can utilize that in order to set ourselves up to have less inputs in the future, right? Where we have a more self space. If we can catalyze that quicker using, instead of just, using a chainsaw instead of a handsaw, right? That requires fossil fuels, then maybe it's worthwhile to do that. And I'm thinking of this example precisely because Ben Falk in the book that you held up before talks about that, right? He talks about, that, while we still have these resources available, we should make use of them in order to,
Right.
uh, quicken, our ability to
The setup phase.
the setup phase. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Where there's a
Because
lot of
in the long
intense
term,
labor
you know,
needed.
in the long term, the idea behind permaculture in the long term is that your inputs, go drastically down in the long term.
Yes.
That's
You're investing in the biodiversity and biomass of your
exactly.
surrounding. Yeah.
Yeah,
And the
yeah,
massive dividends of huge nuts and fruit harvests and stuff.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, perennials are, I think are,
Garden of Eden stuff.
yeah, hope, that's definitely that's my long-term vision for our little plot that we have.
Yeah.
Is that, but in the meantime, there's also, this is kind of a tangent. There's also kind of like a war in the underground alt ag scene about like perennials versus mixed approach. And I'm more of a mixed approach type of guy. Like there's some like
That just got
perennial
esoteric. I love it.
maximalists who are like, annual crops have no place, in a permaculture garden. And I'm just like, come on, guys. Like, I like tomatoes. And you've also read Chris Maje's Small Farm Future, and he also argues for the
Yeah.
mixed approach, and he also has
Yeah.
arguments that, hey, like perennials are great, but they're not a silver bullet either. Like,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. Makes
thing about
sense.
a mixed approach.
Yeah. I mean, if someone who just did the both and podcast, that's your legacy in the
Yeah,
podcasting space. Well, there might be more, I don't know, but both and is your podcasting
yeah.
niche. Then I would be really disappointed if
Right, right, exactly, exactly.
you were in the mixed approach.
Yeah. Well, I know I probably disappoint Jared all the time, but I'm a little bit, I think I, one movement I made since both end is I've become more like on the side of like, what we're talking about, of
Yeah.
bioregionalism, localism. So I'm a little bit less both Andy than I used to be, and I'm okay with that. Like, there's people that I
Well,
just think are
you have
wrong.
an area of interest that you're like in a vision for the future you're working toward.
Yeah, yeah,
You're
and I
not
think,
just like holding all the truths.
right. Yeah, I mean, I think I'm glad there's people out there who are like, pure mimetic mediators, this that are like, I'm always trying to bridge and trying to find the both and kind of solutions, but I don't think it's good for any of us to be in that space all the time. At some point, we have to be like, I'm gonna, these are my values. This is what I think is correct. I'm still gonna let that evolve, and I'm gonna be open to new information. But like, when you're actually operating in the world and making decisions, it's
Right.
like that's an embedded ideology, and so you have to, at some point, you have to get off the fence a little bit, I think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Off the
Yeah,
bench and into the dirt.
that's right. That's right. Into the dirt, and into the chicken shit and the
and, the, and in our cases, baby shit. That's
yeah,
also the kind of nice
yeah,
shit. Humanure.
yeah. Human. We haven't gone there yet. We're not at the. We haven't started. Trying to figure that out yet. Yeah, that'll be maybe a couple years down the line. Yeah, I mean, this year we're really focusing on food stuff. I mean, eventually I want to get to like energy. I want to start thinking about, you know, other things like, clothes, clothes manufacturing. I want to get more
Metalware.
into like the manufacturing and the crafts side of things. But for now, I'm like, okay, I'm going to go buy a shovel at the store, and then I'm going to like focus on food. And
Yeah.
yeah, I
Yeah.
feel like that's for me. I think for a lot of people, that's the easiest way to like the lowest hanging fruit of localism is food. I would say it's hard
Yeah.
to
Gardening.
have your neighbor make you a shovel, but you can borrow seeds from your neighbor and start growing stuff.
Yeah. Right. Right. And you can go you can go get seeds very easily, and as soon as if you figure out how to harvest the seeds. So I've
Yeah,
been learning. My last season was a little bit of seed harvesting.
yeah,
Sent some of those to you.
yeah, 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 yeah. You have
You
to.
still got them.
Yeah, we're definitely gonna try those out this year.
Sweet.
Yeah. No, I think seeds are very important in the long term of like, because we are seeing a lot of consolidation and proprietary kind of seed ownership in the larger agribusiness space, particularly around GMOs. I think I'm not as worried about the science of GMOs as I am worried about the legal implications of GMOs, and ownership of genetic varieties, things like that. And so I think it's really, I find it very important that we have, households that are saving seeds and over years adapting seeds to their particular soil types and climate, but also communities sharing seeds and creating kind of an alt seed economy. Um, I think that's that's quite important because right now I can order seeds online and get them no problem, but I'm not sure if that'll always be that option will always be available. And so the more that we can have seed libraries, right? Like one great thing about this place is you can go to the library here and there's a seed library and there's families that have been here for generations that contribute to the seed library, and that's where we got a lot of our initial seeds. Um, and I'd like to be able to contribute to that because the more that you can like save seeds, adapt seeds, like over time, you're taking the plants that are the most suitable for your environment, the ones that do the best, and you're actually getting seeds that will hope in theory produce better in the long run because they're very much um, yeah they're very much calibrated to the environment.
And how what's your elevation up there? Are you 3,000 plus?
We're like 4,000.
Okay, higher than
Yeah, we're like 400 feet lower elevation than Boone,
okay.
which you can definitely see. Like oftentimes it's like snowing in Boone and it's not snowing here. Um, that kind of stuff. Yeah. What is it where you are?
We're at 2,200 feet roughly,
Okay.
so
Okay. Nice.
quite a bit lower. We've got I
Yeah.
guess that means a little bit of a warmer, probably a little bit warmer.
Yeah. That actually sounds great. I wouldn't mind. I mean, I think the climate here is pretty good. Um, but a little bit lower, but still in the mountains. I think in the south is probably like optimal. Kind of
Well,
optimal.
yeah, I mean, there's a lot to like about it, that's for sure.
Maybe I mean it might get a little hotter in the summer.
It does get
But
hot, yeah.
yeah,
There's some periods of hotness for
like
sure.
here it doesn't really get over 85 degrees. It does get humid, but it
Yeah,
doesn't get over 85.
we get in the 90s
Yeah, yeah. So I
and
guess trade off.
increasingly so.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, so that's interesting. So like thinking about bio regions or eco regions, like we're in a similar kind of larger bioregion but elevation wise, we're at
yeah.
quite different elevations. So that means
Right,
we're going to have some different kind of conditions at the same time of the year, typically.
right. Yeah, I mean, so bioregion is a very nebulous concept, right?
Yeah.
Like, I tend to think I like to think of Southern Appalachia as its own bioregion, but for me that's as much cultural and historical as much as ecological. Um, but and that's why you know being sensitive to multiple scales, right? And the idea behind localism is minimum viable scale for a specific intention, a specific task. And so, for the intention of kind of creating a bioregional identity and economy, I think like Southern Appalachia is very appropriate. But for creating very specific crops for a very specific soil type, elevation, et cetera, that's maybe more appropriate to a holler, right?
Hmm.
to one river valley. Um, and so being able to navigate these multiple scales, I think, is
Yeah.
depending on what your purpose is, right? I mean, for computer, for digital stuff, the minimum viable scale might be national or international, right? And so it really depends on what are you trying to do.
Typically, most models they're trying to get to scale like large numbers. They'll be
Hmm.
going to be doing that for sure. That's right.
Yeah,
But then you've got other things like so. There's the Discord channel that
yeah,
we've been, which I haven't been on much in the recent days, but like there's clearly a lot of interest in folks
yeah,
connecting around homesteading and
yeah.
farming.
There's like 400 people on that channel now.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
and it's cool to see. And We started to talk about this a little, but I'd love to kind of put together like a prototype network for
Mhm.
that kind of zooms in for people that are like in our region,
Yeah,
so we can kind of like have a little bit more like in-depth place to like connect and
yeah,
share resources or things like that.
yeah.
Yeah,
That's the dream. One
build
person you should
connections.
talk to is Ashley, the Rhizoma School account, because I mean,
Yeah, we interact a lot on Twitter. Right?
oh, cool. Yeah, she's interested in creating an app that's like a localism app, um, and basically the idea, and it's kind of similar, I think, to what we've talked about before, of just creating using kind of a digital platform to help us better connect to kind of local resources, right? So it's just a little bit easier to figure out if your neighbor has something to sell that you can get instead of going to Home Depot, or you know what I mean, or
Right.
and but that's to me that's like one half of my long term vision. One half is like developing the homestead, creating a little Garden of Eden, but the other half is to create these dense networks where we can actually start becoming more less dependent on global supply chains, on extractive supply chains, because I don't think any of us can do it by ourselves.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think whatever the modern mindset is, I don't even know what that is, if that's a thing. But
Yeah,
there's a certain way that seems like people will sort of assume that the level of convenience that they have access to will continue forever, and it's sort of taken for granted in a
yeah,
sense that
right,
that this stuff doesn't just like it's not magic, even though it
right,
appears as such.
right, right.
I just had a grocery store delivery. It's like magic. There's food.
Yeah, yeah, right,
And then
exactly.
like, but I also know it's like it's not magic when you grow the seed and you watch it come into fruition, and then like you see things eat it, and it's like, oh no, I want to eat
Yeah,
that.
yeah, exactly. Right, right. Yeah, it's coming from somewhere. Um, yeah. Um, no, I mean, one thing that um, Joe Brewer talks a lot about, and bioregionalists in general, is like it can be a really useful exercise to just go through an inventory. And it's like, where does your water come from? Where does your energy come from?
Oh, Jason, I'm sorry, I muted you by accident. Sorry, I was trying to mute myself. I don't know if you can unmute.
Okay, I think I unmuted myself.
Hey, the joys of no editing.
Yeah,
This is
exactly.
to the
It's
to the to the alien
people are
uh,
just gonna if this goes out and
sociologist.
people watch it, people are just gonna have to deal with it. Yeah.
Sorry.
No, I mean just taking a basic inventory. I mean, it's funny. This is a meta learning opportunity. We're talking about not taking things for granted, and here we're making, our media a little bit less produced, so it's a little bit more difficult to just siphon in the information into your brain and then forget about it with all of this kind of uh, with this stuff. And so like we shouldn't take our media for granted, and we should
Yeah.
really put into work to really get the information we want. We should also not take our energy and our water, and
Mm.
we should
Yeah.
understand like what are our
Totally.
soil types and what can we grow here and where does our food come from, and like that can just be a really useful exercise to make a list of our dependencies, right? And then we can start thinking about, okay, like do and when I say our dependencies, I also mean our kind of how plugged in we are to the consumer economy, right? And then it's not to do this to like feel bad about ourselves, but it's really to clarify. Okay, how can I, you know, what might be some opportunities to be more self provisioning, to source locally. To support local producers, um, things of that nature. Enter into the informal economy, which is another kind of, that's kind of a libertarian concept. Like there's this concept in libertarianism of agorism, which I think is an interesting concept of, like, if I give my neighbor eggs and they give me a haircut, right? Like, should that necessarily, be under the purview of the federal government, right? I mean, that's kind of a libertarian sensibility, but I kind
Hmm.
of buy into it a little bit.
Yeah.
But it's right. But it's like how much of my livelihood, like how much of it really needs to be monitored and taxed and et cetera, et cetera. That's kind of a whole other that's kind of a whole other tangent.
Yeah, well, and it's like people that get really extreme on that side, they decide they're just going to stop paying taxes, and then they end up in jail.
Yeah,
It's like,
that's
oh
true.
yeah,
That's true.
okay, good job. I
Yeah,
know, I know
yeah,
people. I know people.
that's true. That's true.
Sad.
Right, but um, I mean, one of the issues when we're getting into ag with kind of ag policy is that it's generally, the policy is generally influenced by big agribusiness that is looking for standardization at a very large scale because that benefits them because they can do that while the small producers cannot do that. And so,
It's the scale, exactly. It's the
it's the
same thing.
scale. And
Yeah,
so, like, for example, if I had a milk cow and I wanted to drink that milk unpasteurized and give it to my neighbor, like I can, like if I met every single regulation, I probably it probably wouldn't be viable to do that, right?
yeah.
Um, because the policy was created with a much bigger scale in mind, a much bigger economic scale in mind, and so because there's not as much flexibility and local context in in these policies, sometimes you have to be a little rebellious, be a
Yeah, I
little
agree.
anarchic.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think there's that. Yeah, I'm with you on that.
Mhm.
There are appropriate places to be rebellious, and then there's just immature and
Yeah,
idiotic rebelliousness.
that
And
too.
sometimes
That
people
too.
do both. I mean,
Right. 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 Yeah.
I've done both. I've done all of the
Mhm.
above. Um, it's making me think about, it's funny. I feel like it's pretty clear to me the path toward, uh, I want to call it a certain kind of liberation. It's a kind of
Mhm.
social liberation or cultural liberation, economic liberation. It includes a lot of different dimensions. It
Yeah.
feels like, but the path is clear. I feel like I'm on the path, but the path is clear in the sense that, like, tasting your own food, you see what is authentically good, like food.
Yeah.
And as long as you have good soil and, assuming some things in terms of the
Right.
conditions, but,
Yeah.
um, and then contrasting that with like Venkatesh Rao's, term, the premium mediocre,
Uh huh.
the Starbucks and
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
the like the things that appear good, but actually they're not that good. And when you
Yeah.
can really only fully see that, like if all you're used to is mediocre, then premium
Mhm.
mediocre seems good,
Right.
but if you
Right.
have like a real rootedness in like something that's really good for you, then it's like
Yeah.
pretty mediocre. It's like you see the mediocrity of it, and
Yeah.
see through all of the sheen that lures you in to paying $10 for a frappy whatever latte.
Right. Right. Where and the beans. Starbucks has had some initiatives to like fair trade and stuff, but in general, a lot of this premium mediocre stuff has a lot of externalities that aren't included, in the price, right? Um, and I think when if we're really taking sustainability seriously and ecological consciousness seriously, like that for me is by growing some of your own food and eating it, you're actually like you're the land that you're living in, that you're inhabiting, is actually becoming part of your body. Like you're becoming part of your land, and the land is becoming part of you, like literally, right? Like the nutrients in the soil that you're cultivating become part of your body, right? And by doing that, you're actually becoming more aware of what are the real limits, right? What are the ecological limits that none of us, have grown up really, being aware of, right? And so, yeah, I mean, the food is better, right? It's it's a lot of work,
Yeah,
but there's a lot of like sweat equity
right,
involved with it.
right.
But it's
Which is good if you're
also,
aging in your middle ages.
yeah, yeah, and yeah, I mean, it does have, in some ways it's kind of trad, right? Like that. This is why a lot of the people who are interested in kind of homesteading and permaculture these days are trad, right? And there's this whole and I know there's a whole discussion about like there's articles coming out about that this can tip into fascism, and I am sensitive to that. But I don't think that all trads who want, who have kind of like a Wendell Berry sensibility of like, they just want to have their local parish and have like, and have their traditions and grow their food and stuff. Like I don't think all of that is, like I feel like some leftists try to paint that whole side of the picture as fascist. And I think that's a mistake. And when you do that, you're actually more likely to, to provoke people to go into a fascist direction, right? Um, but I mean, anyway, going back to like ecological consciousness, part of that is actually like being sensitive to your ecological environment and how your sustenance is impacting, is impacting the world, is impacting your world. And the more localized it is, the more understanding you have of what is the real cost of what I'm eating, what I'm consuming, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm. It seems like there's been a real acceleration of like thinking about these things because of the pandemic. I know in my own experience, it's like it's felt like I wouldn't have done maybe half of or a quarter of what I tried to do in this sort of gardening and like
Yeah.
studying kind of practices had we not just been like at home. I mean, I just want to say
Right.
that for like for the record,
Right. Right.
I haven't left my home in like how
Yeah.
many weeks or whatever. Yeah,
Right.
so
Yeah.
um, that's really interesting part of this whole thing too, and I feel somewhat hopeful about that in
Mm.
some small way that like it's hard to find composting worms where I am.
Yeah.
That means there's a lot of people who really want to be composting. That there's like there's a growing well, and I'm in Asheville, so there's going to be a little bit more of that
Yeah.
in this area, but
Right.
still, like there's a general trend in that direction. The deurbanization
Mm.
trend that everyone leaving, not
Yeah.
everyone, a lot of people are leaving big cities, especially on the West Coast in New
Yeah.
York,
Yep.
uh,
Yep.
going out into smaller places, coming out to places
Mm.
like where we are, um,
Mm.
and it's interesting, and they don't seem like a lot of them aren't going to go back. They're going to be like, "I love living out here. It's chill.
Yeah.
I've got chickens, and you know."
Right. I mean, yeah, that's well, it's very interesting because we decided to get this place and kind of pursue this trajectory before the pandemic started.
Right, you were a little ahead of the wave.
Yeah, just barely, just barely.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I
So
have
that's the
people
way to
like,
surf it.
yeah, I have people like Joe Brewer and the bioregionalist folks to thank for that, for
Yeah.
as well as people, the localists like Joe Norman as well.
Hmm.
But yeah, I mean, it's just this year has only reinforced kind of um, the trajectory that I was already leaning towards and starting to commit to when I started this. Yeah, I mean, I think that this is a real, with all of the necessary qualifiers of this. This has been tragic, and a lot of people have died, and not to discount that, but it is also an opportunity. I think it's been a wake up call for a lot of people
Hmm.
that um, um, you know we can't necessarily rely on business as usual going forward, and especially living, say, in a big density in like an apartment complex, and not really being connected to any of it, being very specialized in a field, like maybe you're in a programmer, maybe you're in finance, and all of your kind of sources of sustenance you can kind of take for granted as long as you have that income flowing. I think it's been kind of like it's shaken that paradigm, and so there has been a lot of renewed interest.
Yeah.
in deurbanization. I mean, the one thing that I'm a little bit worried about is that people, like one, I know land prices are going way up in
Yeah.
country, and so in one sense, there's always, like like you have to always balance like, sustainability with equity, right? And now it's because the interest is going up. A lot of people might maybe are moving to the country but are not interested in growing food, right? So they're actually, and they're just building,
Sure.
maybe
Sure. Sure.
new, you know, new suburbs will just grow in the countryside, right? And will build
Building
over.
costs are pretty high right now. I bet building has slowed down a bit.
Yeah, that's true. The building costs have gone up. That's true. But the land prices, I know
Are
nationally, are
shooting up.
shooting
Yeah.
up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
That seems generally true.
and so, yeah. Um, but I am hopeful that, at least, I get people DMing me like on Twitter all the time saying like, hey, like the stuff you're posting is inspiring to me. Like, this is the direction I want to go.
Yeah.
And um, and I wish them the best, but it's hard. It's very hard.
Yeah.
Like I'm very, like, we're, I think we're both very privileged, right? Like the
Yeah.
fact that we're able to buy land and buy a house on land,
Oh
like we're
yeah. That's
very,
it's taken a long time to.
yeah,
I'm sure for
right.
you as for us
Exactly. Like
to be
we're
this.
both 37, 37 and a half. But in the long term, I think we're going to have to come up with, you know, some kind of solution to make land accessible, much more accessible to people, like
Yeah.
arable land, and that's going to be, I think, community. Like in the city, it might be, it might be a community garden as well. In the suburbs, it's ripping up your lawn and planting raised beds, stuff like, planting trees. In the country, it might be, you know, land trusts, and having like permaculture cooperatives and stuff like that.
Yeah, I
In
was
terms of
going to
like,
say, it seems like we need a lot of new models that
yeah,
are actually scale. They're actually. I don't mean scalable like always big. I just mean like some models like can replicate and have a few, centers, and that's enough. It doesn't need to be
yeah,
like massive thing, but like we need a lot of
right,
diversity of, kind of different ways of doing things.
yeah,
It's
and
just
yeah,
hard with
and
legal structures, but
yeah, definitely. And I think I'm pretty open minded about, like the thing I like about the localist paradigm is that it's pretty open minded about whether it's more like in terms of what is the ratio of what is collectively owned and what is privately owned, right? And that's kind of like the
yeah,
capitalist socialist kind of
right.
paradigm, and I think that we're going to have various mixes of that in different places, right? And so in some places you're going to have more privately owned stuff, but hopefully there will be like a mutual aid ethos and a village economy ethos that, like in Southern Appalachia, we've had in the past, right? With the settlers. In other places, I think, thinking in terms of like more kind of collectively owned, like eco regions. I know like the regen movement is talking about like kind of prefab like eco villages that is accessible to people and stuff. And I think we're gonna need a lot of that as well.
They need to be super affordable.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
that's the thing I haven't seen anyone really. I've seen people trying to do it like with the open source ecology folks,
Yeah,
Eco Seed House. I've seen like promises of 3D printed houses that'll be super cheap,
yeah,
but they're not actually like you can't go onto a website and order one.
right,
So
yeah. Yeah,
yeah,
I
that,
don't
that
think
seems like
we've
a big
quite
problem.
realized all of the cosmo localism stuff. Like that's still
Yeah,
that's still like a potential.
yeah,
But I'm hoping in the next 10 years, like we really see, you know, at scale. And what I mean by at scale is like broadly at local scales. Like that's like we're really going to see those take off. And I think that
yeah.
like that it just, in order for this to be a larger scale movement, you can't just have upper middle class or middle class people who can afford
Right.
a two or three
Right.
hundred thousand dollar, you know
Yeah.
house
exactly.
with land to do that. Yeah.
No, it doesn't work for everybody. That's
Yeah.
absolutely right. And to me, it's like, oh, like this is a what I've always. I mean, I've definitely always had with this an orientation of like wanting to share what I'm learning in the
Yeah.
appropriate ways, and definitely wanting to think about ways to help support other people who have
Yeah.
less access, traditionally and typically,
Yeah.
to do that. Like seriously, that's a very important thing. We've been thinking with our Buddhist geeks. Um, thinking about retreats, this
Mhm.
pandemic. Oh, this is interesting. I haven't shared this with you. The pandemic, kind of like shut retreat centers down
Mhm.
across the world, pretty much.
Yeah.
And I noticed that some of the people I was talking to regularly on a one-on-one basis or seeing in group work virtually, that they were to itch the retreat bug, and like really, the pandemic has been a great time to go on retreat because it's like everything is forced into lockdown. They would go to retreat cabins, like
Hmm.
solo cabins,
Right. Right.
and
Yeah.
in a couple cases also had internet, and so we're able to stay connected to what we're doing virtually,
Yeah.
talk and practice together, do social meditation, and still be like in solo retreat. And that
Mm.
was it was inspiring to me because it showed a model that could be pandemic proof
Mm.
in the future. So it's like it kind of
Yeah.
incorporates the lesson of this kind of like this could happen at any time, and you have to be resilient with these kind of
Right.
things too.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah.
anyway, that's
Yeah.
the big
No. Yeah. I mean, that's the other hopeful thing is the infrastructure. The new infrastructure that is being built to respond to this, which might be able to apply to other kinds of crises that we're inevitably going to see a society. I mean, the ability to connect digitally, I think, is absolutely essential to to any viable future that we're talking about. You know, um, uh, if we're not just going to sink into a new dark ages, basically, right?
yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, I get going back to the capitalist world system. It's sort of like it's concerning to me, someone who pays attention to techno trends,
Yeah.
that right now we're getting ready to have global broadband internet in the next couple of years
Hmm.
everywhere,
Yeah.
vis-a-vis Starlink and Amazon's low geostationary internet
Hmm.
satellite systems.
Yeah.
And there's like all kinds of implications of that, but one of them is like that there is all of the internet access points, pretty much almost all of them, except for the occasional local internet,
Yeah.
which is fairly uncommon,
Hmm.
that it's all privatized internet access, and so
Yeah.
there's no decentralized access to the internet.
Right.
There's no like
Yeah.
network of people, who are decentralized governance, who raised had a token, a coin that was launched so that they could send up satellite and everyone in the network could
Yeah.
have access to the internet, even if, you know,
Right.
Starlink goes down or whatever.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, you know more about this scene than I do, but I think,
That's a problem.
anytime it is a problem, anytime you have, you know, I mean, we've definitely seen this trend in agriculture. That's the area that I'm most familiar with of like, you know, this tendency towards, like get bigger, get out, and just the scale continues to increase. Of course, this is at the expense of ecology, but in the terms of internet, yeah, I mean, I can see how there would be a trend towards bigger and bigger scale. I mean, the argument to me is that that's a public, we have to think of it as a public utility at some point, right? Where you have
Yeah,
kind of
except
like this,
except countries don't. They
yeah,
regulate the internet of their people. They'll just take it away, like
right.
Like in Myanmar recently.
Yeah.
It's like
So, I mean, I'm curious.
territory
To pick your
internet.
brain. Like, do you see? Are you worried about the risk of like, of because if we're talking about a future world where one we have the power, the energy to power the internet, and we have access to the internet, versus one that we don't, that's a very different world that
Yeah,
we're
it is.
looking at for
No, I
sure.
believe it. I'm a pro internet future. Like, and I'm open to figuring out how to like do the network of trees, or like
Mm.
how to reimagine the internet so it's a little more like
Yeah.
Avatar, the
Right.
the blue Avatar
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
rather world rather than like how it is now.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, to me, like if we can't stay connected across the planet, and can share information and connect and coordinate, or coordinating whatever, that I think that's a real loss at that scale
Yeah.
of connectivity.
Right.
And
Right.
it hurts on the other scales that you're talking about, because then you and I wouldn't be able to connect so easily. We'd have to do was it 2 hour drive?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the 2 hour drive, of course, depends on,
Fossil fuels, at
the
least for me,
energy,
mostly,
either
right?
fossil fuels or solar,
Solar, but
electric
still,
vehicles or,
yeah.
um, yeah.
I have
Yeah.
a pre-order on a Cybertruck. I don't know if we'll end up getting it, but 100
Nice.
down, it's not a hard thing.
Nice. Yeah, I went through a phase where I was, and you called me out on it on Twitter, but like I was reading
Oh,
like
did I? Sorry.
the hardcore. No, I was like going through a phase where, so there's like, I don't know if you've heard of like the peak oil kind of scene,
Oh,
and like,
dude, I heard a lot of peak oil back when I was a student in Europa. I had a couple
yeah,
like peak oil fanatics.
yeah,
They
yeah,
they were so obsessed. I've never seen anything as zealous as some of those
yeah.
folks.
And I got deep into that literature. Like I was reading, John Michael Greer and
Sorry,
Kunstler, and
but there's good
listening
stuff
to
in there, right?
there is. I mean, so so one example is I read a book by Kunstler. I forget his first name. I read a few books by him, but one is like Living in the Long Emergency, and it's so he had a famous book that was big in the peak oil scene in the aughts. But he put out a book this year, and he was like saying, he's basically saying like, okay, like why didn't our predictions come to pass? And he basically,
Right,
had
right.
reasons,
Sort
right?
of.
He was like, well, we had the shale oil boom, and we had cheap credit, but it's all a bubble, and it's still all gonna crash. And then he has a series. He has a fiction series called World Made by Hand, 4 books, which I read all of them, which is basically like we basically lose access to electricity, and what would the world look like? And it's pretty dark. There's like a few little bubbles. His story focuses on like upstate New York, and like a little community basically learns how to like live in this new world and fight off invaders and stuff. But it's a pretty dark world. A lot of people die. A lot of people die.
It's a doomer vision for
It's
sure.
a doomer vision, and I was like getting pretty deep into that stuff for maybe
Yeah,
like a month. Um, but I'm hoping, I just think that I would much prefer that this more kind of like energy and tech optimist vision, in this sense, where we can at least, we're still more localized economically, but we can at least connect to each other, and we still have access to energy, the energy we need to do,
yeah,
to power appropriate technology, et cetera. Like that's a much more viable vision for all of, for all of humanity to kind of like, transition, rather than 80% of the population to die, and then 20%
right.
figure out how to live, right?
Right. It's like
Yeah.
I don't. there's something about. I think there's something about contemplating those visions as helpful, like particularly for people to to shake them out of habitual
Yeah.
thinking, and to test kind of like ungrounded idealism, and shake the foundations of what I think I know. I mean, which is so
Yeah.
important. I mean, that's huge. How else can you shake yourself free
Right.
without doing that?
Yeah. Well, that's why I call myself now a doomer optimist.
Yeah, I like that. And
Yeah.
I've used a similar term that I learned from Lisa Sherman, who you met, the apocalyptimist.
Right. Right.
It's
Yeah.
pretty similar. For me, I've almost internalized it as a design principle at this
Hmm.
point,
Yeah.
which is like design things that'll be good in heaven and good in hell, uh,
Yeah.
so that
Yeah.
regardless of what happens, which
Mm.
what what strand of the multiverse unfolds,
Right.
or I
Yeah.
slip into, like it'll be good.
Yeah. There's a podcast I like, the survival podcast, and the way he phrases it is like, basically how to live well, if things go bad, or even if they don't. Right.
Yeah,
that type
There
of
you go.
thing. And I think that's a
Yeah.
similar ethos.
Yeah. Because
Yeah,
we just don't have enough information to have a fucking clue how it's really going to play out
yeah,
over these like longer time horizons,
yeah.
these larger scales.
Yeah, I mean, so my like what I'm hoping, and taking into account like fully considering our climate and ecological crisis,
Yeah.
um, our potential energy crisis, et cetera, is that, and this is how John Michael Greer phrases it, is that like when we think of collapse, like oftentimes people think of like a building falling down, like the two towers falling down. But another way to think, like collapse can happen at multiple time scales, right? And so if you're thinking of a collapse as like a 50-year time scales, well, what is collapsing? It could be the old world order, right? And if we're having phases of collapse of an unsustainable system, like what we're seeing, for example, with the pandemic. But if it's happening, if it's graduated enough that we can, every like mini collapse gives an affordance to adjust and to adapt and to actually we start living a different way. Like that can be, to me, that seems like a path through kind of like this tightrope, right, through the needle, where if everything collapsed tomorrow, like we're all fucked basically.
Right.
But
Right.
if it happens in kind of like these stages,
Yeah.
say over decades, you know like
In fits and starts as well, because we have these
exactly.
sort of natural disasters or droughts or things that
Yeah,
happen that we kind of get
yeah.
hit by. We
And I mean, the sad thing about all of this is that none of them are consequence free, right? Like they're like people die, right? Like it's just when you have massive drought, when you have sea level rise, like people are dying. Like that's just and you know and so
and poor people are dying
and
in
it's
the global South primarily, right?
exactly. There's a
And in the
huge justice
forest.
component, environmental justice component to this, and so part of what I teach my students in my classes when we're thinking about like responding to climate change or ecological collapse is like there's two components. There's mitigation, which like we have to get our carbon footprints down. We just have to.
Right.
But there's also adaptation. Like how can we help communities adapt? And really, we should focus on the communities that are most vulnerable. And again, this happens to be in the global South. I mean, Bangladesh. I mean, if the projected sea level rise in the next 50 to 100 years of like a meter takes place, that's like 30 million people that are being displaced, right? Like, how is the world going to respond to a refugee crisis of that scale? Like, we're going to have to get our shit together to be able to respond to that in a humane way.
Right. And then and I'm assuming it wouldn't just be in Bangladesh that would be happening over that scale. It'd be like
Yeah.
happening multiple places at
I
once.
mean, coastal communities all over the world, our coral reefs are dying, all of the aquatic
Yeah.
ecosystems. Like coral reefs are the most biodiverse ecosystems in the world. I believe that's true. And, if coastal communities can no longer support themselves, both, I mean, maybe they can build, walls to prevent, sea level rise, but, greater storms, intensity of storms, frequency of storms, et cetera, et cetera. Like a lot of coastal areas, might be able to adapt, but some of them might not. And then we really have to, and this is where when you're talking about scale, this is where we really have to think about global governance. As much as I call myself a localist, I do think that global
Yeah. We still have
governance
to
in
coordinate at
some
that
cases,
scale.
yeah,
We
exactly.
have to we have to be able to coordinate at every scale.
Exactly. If the minimum viable governance is a global refugee crisis, that's a global scale, and that's where you have to
Yeah.
deal with it.
Yeah. You
Yeah,
can't do shit at the local scale,
yeah,
at like the home level scale about that.
yeah.
Really.
Right.
I mean,
Exactly. Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But if localities, have moved in a different direction, are more in touch with their bioregions, are more self sufficient, and have capacity, then then they can take in, for example, refugees, right? Like the more that we know how to grow food sustainably in our local area,
Hmm.
and the more surplus we have from that, the more that we can absorb new people to come in and to welcome them, in
Right.
as part of the society, right?
Yeah.
If we don't
Yeah.
have
Which
that
is a real
capacity,
shift.
if we don't have the capacity, we can have, our humanitarian hearts can bleed all they want. We're not going to be able to help them.
Right. Right. So, I want to go back a minute because I was thinking about the energy internet and how important that, for me, that is as a technological substructure for
Yeah,
like a just future where humanity is still connected and thriving to some degree.
yeah,
Is like we've got to be able to send energy to each other, and to like if we're producing and storing an excess of energy, I want to be able to like send some of that to you,
right.
like I would an
Yeah,
email, and that's
yeah,
there's no technological reason that our network shouldn't work that way, that it be multi-directional.
yeah.
Just
I mean, we would need the transmission infrastructure
right, and
primarily to do that, right?
right, and that's the smart grid, so
Yeah,
called,
yeah,
and that's kind of being built out, but it's really much slower. Like there's certain things happening here, like with the smart meters that are kind of a component of that larger
yeah.
built out vision, but it's
Mm,
definitely not built. And we need, I mean, to me, it's like we need that desperately if we want to
yeah,
create these bioregional networks where we can
yeah.
produce and share energy more efficiently,
Right.
in close range. Like that seems like really important to be able to do that somehow.
Yeah,
And I
yeah. I
know
mean,
there
that
are
to
folks
me, I
working on
mean,
this.
you can apply that to a lot of things. You can apply that to energy. You can apply that to
Yes,
food,
right,
where
both,
you
and
know
they're connected.
they're connected. So the idea with bioregionalism is as a bioregion, you try and be as self sustaining as possible as a bioregion, with the acknowledgement that you're never going to be fully self sustaining, especially with risk involved. And there's going to be years where you're going to have poor harvests or something, and that's where you're going to have trade, and you're going to have information transmission across scales, and physical transmission of things like energy,
Yeah,
things like raw material resources, right? Like you can have a 3D printer, but if you don't have cobalt to build solar panels, you're screwed. And where do we get the cobalt from? We get it from the Congo. Are we going to rely on slave labor from the Congo to get the cobalt? Right? Like these are all things that we're going to have to figure out. Like how do we, in a more just way, still, and this is really the idea behind cosmolocalism or cosmopolitan localism, which is really, if I, there's like, if I were to say like, what kind of localist are you? At the highest, at the most abstract, I'm a metamodern localist. At the less abstract, I'm a cosmopolitan localist, which is basically, you know, like you have basically, you can almost think of it as cells in a body, where like the cells are autopoietic in the sense that they have self regeneration capacities, but they're still trading resources, across the circulatory, immune, systems, and all of the different systems that are operating in the body.
right, right,
Yeah.
right, right. And this is, that's why I sent you that the video of what's his name, uh, the Monopoly guy. I think of him.
The Monopoly guy.
He looks like the dude from the Monopoly box, which is ironic because he's got the like kind of the monocle.
Oh,
Sorry,
the third industrial
Third
revolution guy.
Industrial Revolution. Sorry,
Yeah.
sorry to the guy.
Yeah. No, I mean, yeah, I watched that video. I liked it. I really, that would be the ideal setup. If you have decentralized energy, smart grid energy, where communities can produce a lot of their energy, and also share it, especially in times of need. In times of uh, black swan events, so to speak, where um, you have, again, you can have you can try and be as self-sufficient as a watershed as you want, but you might have some kind of, you know um, you might have some kind of disaster that where you're going to have to rely on your neighbors for a little while.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and this, yeah, I mean, this is like the thing that used to be more common that we've sort of lost touch with, and now we're having to like retrieve that wisdom, but in a,
Yeah.
we have different options for how we can do it, uh,
Yeah.
that they didn't have. And it's like, while we have them, should we use them?
Yeah.
To me, that's like a no brainer. But yeah, no, I like his idea of the three internets. Like, you've got your energy internet, your logistics internet, and your communications internet. But we really only have one. The communications internet's like really marked
Yeah.
out. We don't
Yeah.
have like our driverless logistics, internet, where we can
Right.
just like, I can drop off something. Well, we do kind of, but it's not driverless. We have a
Right.
logistics that's
Right.
even
Well,
fossil fuel powered.
what do you? I mean, just asking you, since you're more in touch with this with this kind of discussion. Like, how close do you think we are to, say, an energy internet?
I'm not really sure. I haven't had as much time to be researching these things over the last year, having
Yeah, it's
as
been a
I'd like
crazy
to.
year.
Yeah, I haven't been really as in touch with what's kind of cutting
Yeah.
edge news around that. I've been much more like reading, farmsteading, homesteading books and stuff.
Yeah. Well, let's use this as a pivot.
Sure.
Do you want to talk a little bit about your vision for your homestead? I saw your video
Oh yeah,
about kind of what you want to do, but do
the
you want
outside
to talk
one.
about kind of your vision for it?
Yeah, I mean, it's connected to what we've been talking about. It's like making that practical. We'd like to be able to provide some percentage of our food, and I think
Mm,
if I were to like just ballpark it, I'd say, it'd be nice to be able to produce something like half of what we eat, which is a huge,
yeah.
I mean, way bigger, way more than
Yeah.
we currently do,
Yeah.
like
Right.
orders of magnitude.
Yeah.
So, there's a lot of goals and projects and things. Like, there's
Yeah.
a whole mountain of things, as you know, we
Yeah.
could be
Yeah.
doing for that.
Right.
But that's the kind of vision, and it's not self sufficiency. It's more of a sense of like interdependent
Right.
sufficiency.
Where as a kind of co-producer,
Yeah.
you have something to offer,
Hmm.
as well as receive.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I do, I feel like I'm
Mm,
already doing that, with the work that I do with Buddhist
yeah.
geeks, and, kind of on that side of things. But this
Right.
is sort of, it's like a grounding and
Yeah.
rooting that same wisdom like at home.
Right. Right.
It's like the waste that we use, a good significant portion of the waste that we use, I would like to be recycling back into the,
Yeah.
into to the biosystem that we have
Right.
here, and be attracting beneficial insects and pollinators and
Right.
animals, and just like wilding, greening like the
Yeah.
space.
Yeah.
Um, which, we're like close to some forest. There's already tons of wildlife I see here. A lot of
Right.
robins show up and camp in the
Yeah.
yard. So I don't think it'll
Right.
be like some crazy hard thing, because it's already a pretty good conditions.
Right.
But
Right.
that's kind of the vision. I like the regenerative vision that Ben Falk talks about.
Mhm.
That just seems right on to me somehow. And I've seen that realized in my grandparents' homestead. I
Yeah.
don't know that they would call it that, but it's like that. They
Mm.
have a 17-acre place with a lot of gardens, and you
Yeah.
know, it's just like it's magic. It's like it is literally magical
Yeah.
to hang out in that kind of space. That's so alive.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well,
I want to
that's
live in a magical land.
the interesting thing about. I mean, the thing about permaculture is that it wasn't like invented, right? Like in the '70s. Like it was drawn from indigenous communities. A lot of it these days is drawn from traditional, even in the United States, like traditional small scale agriculture. And there's a lot of work now being done to kind of like relearn a lot of the wisdom of the past, right? Of like
Yeah,
this,
yeah,
like people have much less resources than we do now, and they figured out a way to survive. How do they do that, right? And learning those things is really helpful. But I also, I really resonate with. I mean, for me, it's like, there's one argument of like more of a logistical, like, maybe we want to grow a little bit more of our own food, both as a household, but as a community, because, it's an uncertain world, but also culturally, when we talk about modernity, like I can definitely resonate. Like it feels soulless to me. Like living in the suburbs feels soulless to me. And I lived in the suburbs for a while, and I can never really pinpoint why I was so unsatisfied, right? And you know, like what you're talking about, like being in a place that's alive and being alive with it, and um, being part of the ecology, so to speak,
Yeah.
um, I don't know. I think that's something that we've lost in the
And sharing
pandemic.
it with people you love, obviously.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And there's a real cultural element to that I think a lot of people are now starting to wake up to, like,
Yeah.
the homesteading movement suddenly becoming so popular? Because like there's this kind of intangible kind of culture, like there's this kind of recognition that we've lost something in our culture of you know being able to you know be a co-participant in many aspects of your life and of your sustenance, and the community implications of that, like harvest festivals, right? Like we don't have harvest festivals anymore. We used to have so many different community events that were tied to the sense of place
Right.
that we've lost.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. Well, let me ask you a little bit further with your homestead. So you've talked about, like, I know, like, I'm not thinking of your video, and so you have, like, on the south side you have like a little spot where you want to put like a garden,
Yeah. 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 That's
right?
the sort of
But
current project.
you're worried about, like, there's an old septic system there. You have to figure out, like,
Good news is it's not. I was reading the map incorrectly.
okay,
It's on the other side of the house, so we don't have to
oh,
worry about
good, that's nice.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah, it is
that's
nice.
nice. Yeah.
So I just a couple days ago got some nice raised beds that'll be durable and last for hopefully a decade or two.
Nice, nice.
Yeah, and so I'm gonna set up that sort of south. I guess it would be the let's see, be the southeast kind of part of the
Yeah,
property, and sort of get that set up to be able to plant. Now we're going to also start in our little grow table
yeah.
tray thing, start to kind of do some seedlings and just
Nice.
like hopefully we catch the wave and everything is ready and we can
Yeah.
plant them.
Yeah, no, spring comes fast. Spring
It's
comes
a
fast. It's like now it's like, oh my gosh, it's already February. I got to get my shit together.
yeah,
February
yeah.
is like
We
the
just moved,
alarm.
so it's like oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Now
No,
I gotta.
I feel you. That's where we moved here
That's
late
right.
February last year, and we're
That's
like,
right.
we got so much stuff to get ready.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Um,
That's a hard move, hard transition, and then everything in March happens, of course.
yeah. And let me ask you, in 10 years, so you also said you might want to eventually build like a hoop house and have like a little orchard. Do you have like an idea of, like, 10 years, what you want, what is your ideal vision for the property in 10 years?
Yeah, I was actually doing a little thinking on that and reflecting on different time horizons. Um, I think Ben Falk again recommended that as a little exercise. So,
Right.
um, yeah, I think it's a little hard to talk about just what's happening at home without talking about some other things. But
Yeah.
I think part of the vision that I have here, it's like this is our family home,
Hmm.
and um, at the same time, we want to be supporting kind of other local farming projects and
Hmm.
retreat projects and things like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
So
Nice.
those are kind of intertwined, but like the longer vision is being able to do both of those things.
Mm.
And I think maybe after 10 years, this place will be like, it won't be so much work to
Yeah.
maintain or
Right.
like to keep things. I mean, obviously, who knows in 10 years, we don't know what the ecology will look like, but
Yeah.
um, maybe there'll be more things we'll have to deal with. But
Are you
I
are
hope
you kind of
I'm
are you leaning into, like, the perennial, like the kind of food forest perennial vision?
I love that. I love that idea increasingly. Actually, that was something I found. I found a nice Zen quote I wanted to share with you. A Zen koan
Mhm.
uh, that's connected to that. It's connected to the whole idea of like planting the net forests.
Yeah.
Uh, and so let me see if I can find that. It's in Zen Case 18, Lin Chi. So the person who started the Rinzai School of Zen, there's a story of him and his teacher Huang Po, and it involves planting trees.
Nice.
Yeah, and I heard that from a friend recently, Wes Rosacker, my old buddy, and he's a Zen guy, and I thought immediately of the stuff I've been reading in the Ben's book, and also some of the stuff you've been tweeting about. I'm searching for it, but of course now it's not appearing. Yeah, okay. Here's something. I don't want to quote it from memory because my memory is not going to be. It's not going to do it justice by any means. I've read it like 2 times. So yeah, I mean the vision is kind of like it is sort of to create a mystical Shangri-La,
Uh-huh.
and it's not to create it like I'm responsible for it. I don't want to put it that
Mm.
way, but like in a co-creative
Yeah.
process of like, yeah, I just nature mysticism.
Yeah. I love
Yeah,
it.
I've done the formless mysticism,
Yeah.
extensively, I
Right.
think you have as well, and
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
that's cool. But to
Right.
me, the non-dual stuff is more interesting. The tantric
Yeah.
turn, it's like, oh yeah, like this is what we actually are called to do right now. Like this is
Right.
our fucking dharma. We have to
Right.
figure out how to live on this planet. Like,
Yeah. That
and
is the Dharma. That is, that is the path these days.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. No, I've shifted from spirituality that is highly compartmentalized to no, I want it to be connected to all parts of my life.
yeah, yeah.
Mm.
Okay, I'm gonna find this damn thing if it doesn't kill me. It's the sad thing is most of the links I find are of Zen teachers giving a teisho, a Dharma talk on the koan rather than the
Oh
koan.
gosh.
Of course, I also forget the name of it, so that's the real
Yeah.
problem. But when I find it, I guess I'll have to share that with you. It's a good one. Maybe next time we talk, I can have it ready.
Yeah. That works.
The iron flute case. There it is.
Maybe.
Lin Chi plants a tree.
Okay.
No, I keep going to the same thing. It's a freaking audio. What's up with all these Zen teachers? You just share the text, share the koan. They just, I guess they want to hear themselves talk. Sad. Did you do any formal Zen practice? I don't know if I've asked you that.
No, 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 I haven't. Yeah, for me, I got into it with pragmatic dharma,
Yeah, which has some Zen elements.
and then like the self inquiry, non dual
Like
Advaita
Ramana
stuff.
Maharshi.
Yeah, and basically, I just kind of I kind of try to figure out how to integrate them together.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. No, you're pretty much like a DIY practitioner. Not many people can manage that. I think. Well, I've
yeah,
seen
yeah. It's something just at some
everyone
point
has
for
to go.
me, I was I was like, drawing from different teachers, trying different things, and something just for me just clicked, and I was like,
Yeah,
oh, I can like integrate self inquiry with vipassana, and
yeah,
it's just
that
like,
makes sense.
yeah, fell in love.
That's a cool. So that was your groove is kind of the mindful inquiry.
Yeah, like basically, it's basically like some combining self inquiry, but then trying to trace self inquiry to like, but then applying like vipassana, like if I ask like where am I or who am I or what is aware, like what part of my body lights up, and then investigating those sensations, and then basically just iterating that kind of process. Um, and yeah, it's just first at some point I was just like, oh my gosh, this is this is my system.
So I've got to wrap up here pretty soon. I'm starting to
Sure.
fade. I notice.
Yeah.
Uh, and then I couldn't find Lin Chi, which is like the
Put it
mystery
on,
of Zen.
if we end up releasing this, put it in the show notes.
I will. I'll
Yeah.
put it in the notes. But the thing is, it was on Reddit, and now Reddit's down. Makes me wonder if
Hmm.
you know
Interesting.
It's funny.
Interesting. The hedge fund managers are taking their revenge, I guess.
No, Reddit itself isn't down. I stand corrected. It was just that
Okay.
page.
Uh,
That's good. Yeah, Zen is an interesting one for me because I think that's where it's not where I got my total start, but one of the first practices I did was this sort of Zen breath counting style.
yeah.
And I remember trying to get myself into the Zen posture for quite a while, where I was trying to I was assuming that a certain kind of lotus was there's like levels of lotuses,
Yeah. Right.
uh,
Full lotus. Yeah.
right. And my hips were never going to achieve full lotus.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
that was a struggle, and just kind of ridiculous in retrospect. But,
Yeah.
I've really appreciated the nature focus of Zen. I had a good teacher at Naropa, Jerry Shishin Wick,
Mm.
who was a teacher in the Mazumi Roshi white plum lineage. Right there, you have it in the top, the white plum lineage.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
It's very much aligned with the perennial vision.
yeah, it is, and there's
Yeah.
just some beautiful, direct, Zen poetry that's very nature based, and
Nice. I,
lots
I
of
did I did read a poetry of Zen book, and I still have it. And I got so I've gotten a lot out of kind of like the sensibility of Zen, but I've never actually done formal Zen practice.
yeah. It's really weird. I mean, it's what it is. The stuff that I did. Um, it varies so much depending on the teacher and their influences of everything.
Right.
But yeah, some of the things I've most appreciated about Zen are the way that you're thrown into a context without explanation, and
Yeah.
it's not like the Western
It's
analytical
like
style where I'm going to
right.
tell you everything we're going to do, and then we're going to do it, and then we're going to talk
Right.
about
Right. 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 It's Zen feels like it's more like to short circuit your your kind of dualistic analytical
exactly.
process.
You
Yeah.
you want to be not sleeping that much,
Yeah.
not sure what to do, confused by all the damn bowls and all the things you're supposed to, all the parts of the ritual,
Right.
tired from your knees aching from sitting all day,
Right.
um, and then
Yeah.
just what the fuck are you saying? Count all the stars in the sky?
Yeah. Right.
Fine.
Right. 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 It's like tearing down. It feels like it's tearing down all your offenses. So it's like you trip and then you have an awakening experience.
That's right. It's something like
Yeah.
that, I guess. But I've only gone into it enough to have a sense for what it's about. I haven't been like the
Yeah.
hardcore Zen dude.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That would be
Anyway,
interesting.
cool to talk about contemplative stuff after talking about all the homesteading stuff.
Yeah.
So
Well, like the two things I feel like I could talk about forever and I enjoy talking about are contemplative and like permaculture, homesteading.
we should talk
So
about the maybe next time we talk, we could talk about the how those two interplay in
yeah.
your
Yeah.
my experience.
Yeah. In a nutshell, I think,
Give us the
in
preview.
addition to trying to broaden out, decompartmentalize spiritual practice, it's kind of like the non-dual, applying non-duality to ecological consciousness and realizing that they're highly congruent, right? That, I'm not separate from my environment, from the land. I am part of it. It is part of me, both in terms of consciousness, but also literally in terms of like, I'm actually like eating food from my land that's going into my body and it's becoming part of me. And it's just like that kind of integration that's like the nutshell version. But yeah, that's a great, that'd be a great kind of long form conversation for sure.
Yeah. Well, then, and just the process of growing that food, how
Yeah.
it gets you connected outside more, out in the further zones.
Yeah. Yeah. The
Oh yeah,
physical, the physicality of it, the embodiment of it,
yes,
yeah.
the chance to be regulated by nature, have your
Yeah.
emotional and physical system kind of regulated by some nice bird chirping and
Right.
the colors and the
Yeah.
diversity. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. I found it
Yeah.
super. It's like the thing that's kept me going a lot of the time in this last year.
Yeah. Nice. Nice. Yeah.
Yeah. That and
And
social meditation, doing out
right,
loud practice with people's helped a
right.
lot.
Yeah. No, that sounds awesome. The social meditation stuff sounds awesome. Yeah.
But we've done some of it together.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
You're doing a lot of cool stuff with that. Or we were doing together last time we did in
Yeah.
person. That
Yeah.
was amazing. That feels like forever ago.
Right, right. Yeah, we were also we were also augmenting our our chemistry in order
Yeah,
to.
no, we were flying high.
That was interesting. I remember when we were walking around the table and I was do you remember that? Do you remember when
Yeah,
we did
yeah.
that? You
That was Zen walking right there, man.
yeah, yeah, that was interesting.
See, if I were being more like this would be my more like Buddhist-y woo side,
Mm.
I'd be like, man, there's Zen all up in your field
Yeah,
from a
yeah.
Buddhist perspective.
Right.
I see the Zen everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, to me, it's like a flavor and aesthetic.
Mhm.
It's like a spiritual archetype almost that I
Yeah.
find as a teacher when I work with people. It's like they seem to they seem to have these archetypal connections,
Yeah.
and they're not always the same. But some people get like they have the meta connection where they want to they get interested in everything,
Yeah.
and then they like kind of become a weird hybrid, like you.
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
what exactly is this?
Right. Yeah. No, I think I resonate most with the Zen aesthetic, but
Yeah,
the
yeah,
Vipassana and self inquiry mechanics, and
yeah, yeah. It's just
and
cool.
and Vajrayana, like in terms of like the kind of expressive, kind of like embodied, kind of like I used to be like in drama in high school, and I really loved acting. Like like even the Vipassana, like or the the Vajrayana, like that also captures. Yeah, and so for me, it's interesting to like these different traditions, how they capture different parts of the overall being.
Yeah, and what they leave
Have you?
out too,
What's that?
and what they leave out.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And that's why I'm always like, okay, I'm gonna take a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and I'm a bad Zen person. I'm a bad uh,
Yeah,
Vipassana person. I'm bad at everything from the point of view of that tradition. But like, you
yeah,
know,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
I'm a born amalgamator.
yeah, yeah. Well, that's fun. That's a cool. It's a cool thing. A lot of people don't experience. They just get like really locked into
Right.
they become trad.
Yeah. Right. Right. Exactly.
Trad Zen.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
And it's like, wow, that's not all of Zen could is.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even within every tradition, you have all this diversity. It's like,
Yeah.
making generalizations. It's obviously way more
Right. Yeah. No, it's pretty incredible. It's pretty incredible the legacy that the legacy that has been left to us, and the amount of resources available to us in this period of history.
we have. Yeah, we have a chance to do something good before it all collapses, right?
Right. Well, unless we get this internet going, and then maybe we'll be okay.
I think that would have to be just one small part of like some
Yeah.
way bigger stuff
No,
going,
no, we're still gonna have.
because it could still be owned privately by one,
That's right. That's
power.
right.
It could be
Yeah.
centralized. Net neutrality is not like a given.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree with you. I basically have a like we're entering the new Wild West, and
Yeah.
I'm getting saddled up.
Hey, and we're out in the same wild western North Carolina, so we could
Yeah.
get that the seed train going again this year.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
That's like analogous to like we're both like bounty hunters, and we're going out on like a joint mission together.
Yeah. Hey, I've got those cosmos
Yeah.
flowers. And, finding a
Nice.
place for them. I'm thinking of
Nice.
putting some near our compost bin so they can like
Nice.
really blow up,
Yeah. Yeah. That'll be some good nutrition.
recharged.
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, we got those Cosmos from a friend, so it's that's kind of a local, it's been started to be kind of harvested and traded. So
That's
yeah,
great. Looking forward to it. Well, hey man, I'm gonna
yeah, this is
go
fun.
go rest a little before falling to sleep.
Sounds great. This
Good
is
to hang
fun,
out with
Vince.
you. Good to
Yeah.
talk.
Yeah, man.
Yeah,
Anytime. This
fun
is
to
great.
record too.
What's that? Yeah.
Fun to record too.
Yeah, and whatever you want to do with this, if
I'm
if
open.
you want to just keep it private, I'm okay with that. If you
I'm
want to
open to that too.
put it on YouTube, that's fine. That's fine too.
Okay, cool.